I think it's only been in my feelings. Like I've never changed my approach to it as such. Like
that is what I meant. Like when I talk to you about things, how like what's the barometer of Twitter in Mike's brain right now? Has not been a consistent reading over the years.
No, I feel like that there has been a downward trend. My reasons are threefold for why now. So one, since Elon Musk took over, the service is taking a nosedive in things that frustrate me. I think a lot of the product decisions are weird. I don't like some of the advertising changes. I don't like this sense of like extortion that I feel like is taking over on Twitter. It's like you've been verified for a long time for whatever reason, and now we want to start charging you for it. It's like little things like that have been grating on me. Like that's part one. That wouldn't have been enough if it wasn't for the other things, I feel like. So, well, also I don't like some of the policy decisions that have been made for people that are being brought back onto the service, but I don't really need to get into that more than that point. I am frustrated. Actually, point 1.2 is like, it's just annoying to be on Twitter, and like was annoying to me on Twitter, and all anyone wanted to talk about was Elon Musk. Like I just found that frustrating. Like it just wasn't fun. It was just really annoying, and all anyone wanted to talk about was Twitter and Elon Musk, and it's just like, I'm not really interested in that. Like, and it was just frustrating to me.
Twitter is at its worst when it turns its eye upon itself and then just wants to talk about Twitter.
And this is the longest I've ever seen that happen. It's just been constant, and it's just annoying, and like I don't need that in my life, right? That's
it strikes me as really tiresomely self-involved. Like
Point two, so many of my friends, people whose work I enjoy as well, have left Twitter. So if I sign in, my timeline wouldn't be as fun anyway. So like what was happening is I was feeling these things at point one of like, this isn't fun to be on anymore. I don't agree with the decisions they're making. I don't agree with the moderation changes they're making. Like that stuff was grating on me. But I was like, but this is a community, right? Like I'm part of this community. I'm separating the platform from the people, and it's the people that I want to read. Well, then they all started leaving. So it's like, all right, I've got a lot to hold on to here. But then point three is the biggest one for me. I have wanted to do this for years for my own mental health, and I've finally done it. Like point 1 and 2 gave me the cover to do the thing that I've wanted to do, which is leave Twitter. Hilariously for me, this is the first theme in years where I did not try and shoehorn this in as part of it, and it's the one that I actually did it on. You know, I've had these things of like changing my approach to the internet and all that kind of stuff, but a lot of it was for getting away from Twitter. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One, Twitter's timeline is like typically a not fun place to be because it's like full of people being angry about things all the time. And whether that anger is warranted or not is not the point. It's like, how much of my day do I want to spend ingesting the anger of people, right? That had an overall negative effect on me. Where it was like, surprise, you know, like I'm going on Twitter for whatever reason, and surprise, atrocity, you know, like that wasn't necessarily what I was going for at that moment. Similarly, the way that people react, like the way that people can be to people online. So like I would sometimes be on Twitter and then someone would just start being randomly nasty to me for like seemingly no reason. And I think it's like a similar thing of like that didn't play well for me, of like the surprise of it, you know? And that surprise over time morphed into dread. So like I would open the Twitter app and be like, all right, here we go. Even if there was nothing happening. So like these behaviors ended up creating this cycle of expecting it and being surprised by it. And like that just wasn't good for me. So time to leave it behind. This is why, like reason 3 is why, unlike many people, I am not replacing my Twitter usage with Mastodon or any other service like that. So this kind of social media for me, this like text-based short posting social media where anyone in the world can get in touch with me, or I can get in touch with anyone in the world, like send them messages or read what anyone's going to say, that's gone. Like I want to see what my life is like without this endless stream of thoughts and opinions and news all the time from everywhere. So that's where I am.
When you say that the first 2 points about like the current changes with Twitter, how they're acting as cover for the actual thing, point 3 about your mental health, like what do you mean by that? What do you mean by cover?
So there's 2 things going on. One is I needed something to push me, like I needed an excuse to do it, right? Because nothing was changing. It had to be me that all of a sudden made that change all on my own, right? Which was not easy for me to do. And the other was, well, I always felt like my community expected me to be there, like listeners expected me to be there. So I didn't want to be like, oh, it's time for me to leave, everyone, you know, like, out of the blue. I felt like, and we're going to get, I want to talk about this a little bit more in general, but I would have felt like I was like better than everyone else. It's like this feeling of like, no, I'm leaving Twitter now, like this service, it would have felt weird to me. I can't explain it fully. There's like this relevance thing that's bubbling around in my brain anyway that I want to talk about. But like, I feel like if I would have just left Twitter, it would have kind of been a sign that I didn't want to hear from people at all.
In the sense that you think that's how people would have interpreted it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was worried that people would have thought of it that way.
Right, not that it's actually the case. Yes. That's how you were worried people wouldn't. Oh, okay, all right. I was like, who on earth ever thinks that someone's like, oh, I'm better than you by leaving Twitter? But that's your concern, is that's how the audience might react to something like that.
But like, because I'd always been, and was always very like proud of, especially early in my career, about being approachable, and like, it is something that's important to me, and I always loved that was something that I could do, that like people could ask me questions and I could answer them and stuff like that. But the problem was, in doing that, as the world changed, the type of things that would be said to me changed, and the tone was different, and things could get weird, and it just ended up being not as nice as it used to be. It was kind of like, whether people would feel that way, wouldn't feel that way, it wasn't the thing. It was like a thing in my brain. I didn't want to come off as being this like unapproachable person, or like I didn't want to come off as being like, oh, like you can't get in touch with me on Twitter, so I'm just going to leave. But in so many people leaving, it's given me the opportunity to try this, because I feel like enough people understand the halfway point now, which is I've left Twitter like so many people have, right? But what I'm not doing is replacing it with something else, because I want to try and live my life without this thing.
Yeah, it doesn't matter now, but this is one of those cases where I just wonder how much that worry of the audience interpretation of your actions would have been a real thing or not. But I get what you mean, that if this is a move that you have been eyeing up, now is an excellent time to make that move, because you're not going to get pushback.
Because I feel like people can understand at least part of it, right? Even if they don't get all of it. There would have been 2 parts before of like, why do you want to leave Twitter? And why don't you want to be on this social media? Well, now it's just, why don't you want to be on this social media? Which is half of the thing, right? It's like, it feels like it's easy to understand why I don't want to be on Twitter. Like a lot of people in our community understand that now. Not everyone, and that's fine. And like, I'm not judging other people, right? Like this is not a yardstick for everyone. Even my fellow creators, right? Like if this is a thing that's good for you and like mentally, go for it. For me, it isn't. content. Like, it's just not. It is bad on my mental health and it's not even like that I was like being barraged by haters constantly, right?
No, but like I'm totally on board with this, right? To me, this lines up with a lot of my feelings always about like the news, right? Which even now, like the very concept of what is bounded within those two words has wildly changed since we started talking on this podcast years ago. Because like Twitter is functionally a news feed in a way that it like sort of wasn't at the dawn, but it's the same thing of there's a variance in the interruption of your day, and why would you want that? Or like you need a really good positive upside if there's a thing that can just derail your day randomly at any moment.
That's it.
Yeah, and like this is something that I am aware of with people who really follow the news, where you can see that like something in the news has totally derailed them in a way that just doesn't make sense to the scale of its impact on their life. And it's just, as an outsider, like, you don't have to do that. You don't have to roll the dice randomly for you're going to get derailed for a thing that either doesn't affect you or that you are unable to affect in many ways. So like when you just said there of you started to get the feeling of opening Twitter and like, all right, what's it going to be today? Am I going to find out some horrible piece of news, or like I'm just going to get swept up in whatever the internet is angry about right now? And like with 24-hour news, where it's a bit like, oh, how mysterious. There's always news 24 hours a day. It's like on Twitter, there's some standard amount of anger, and it's like sometimes that anger is focused on very just things. But it's like there needs to be a certain level of anger always, and if there's nothing just to get angry about, it'll be something ridiculous. That people will just like, everyone's angry about this right now, and so you can easily get swept up in whatever the current angry thing is. And then also like being a person on the internet, you do have the issue of just running into someone is really angry at you about something, and again, like maybe they have a you're not going to get any pushback from me about
it's not you that I'm worried about, right?
Oh, it wasn't me that you were concerned was going to berate you on the podcast?
I felt like if there's one person in the world that knows, it's you, because you did it, right? You did it in the most extreme way. There is a feeling that I have, which is expanding in different directions, and I'm working on, is being out of touch.
I was literally about to make the joke, like, but Mike, aren't you worried about being out of touch?
Yes.
Because that's what everybody says, and I always find that kind of hilarious.
Right, but that is what I'm worried about, and it comes in a few directions. It comes in one, people hear me say these things, and like, oh, you're better than everyone else, huh?
I still feel like that's a weird thing in your head. I just can't imagine any reasonable person having that kind of response, but
well, but it's not. But yeah, I agree with you. Right, but this is the thing, it's like the people that were making things difficult for me were the unreasonable people anyway, right?
Yeah, by definition, yeah.
Right? Reasonable, difficult for me to go on to Twitter sometimes, right? Because, a handful of times a month, I'd be dealing with an unreasonable person, and that would destroy a day for me, Like, someone would decide that they wanted to make fun of the way I pronounce words in a day, and like, that will stick in my mind for weeks, right? And like, I don't want that, when I don't need to have that, and I don't need Twitter, so it's like an easy thing for me to just get rid of, right? Like, this is where I ended up. But the concern that I have is like, people are like, oh, you're so you're better than us, right? But that's one part, whatever, I'll deal with that. Like, I don't need to appease to unreasonable people. The thing that I'm more worried about is that either I will lose track of the things that people were talking about, or people will think I have. So I will use, say, for example, I'll use my Apple Focus shows, right, for this.
Yeah.
Because they're more news focused, what's going on, what's the conversation of the day, what are people focusing on, right? That is more of a concern for me, that either A, I'm not in tune with what the Apple community is thinking and talking about, or people think that I'm not because I have a differing opinion and I'm not on Mastodon. When if I was on Mastodon, they may just think I have a differing opinion, but I'm still informed. Now, the perception part, I kind of can't do anything about that, right? There's like, people are going to think that about me or not. The actually staying in touch part, I am working on that. So I've increased the amount of websites and blogs that are in my RSS, so like I'm able to bring in more opinions, and I've also got like a few people. A few people who I think are like tastemakers or some of the louder voices in the community, I have put their Mastodon feeds into my RSS reader. So if I ever want, and they're in a folder called Vibe Check, so if I ever want to see what the vibe is, I feel like I can go to this folder and can have a quick scan through it. But I don't read that like I would read Twitter. It's like a way to inform. Like there's like a bunch of news coming out. Let me go and check the Vibe Check folder and reader and see like what are people kind of saying about this. So this is kind of the thing that I'm trying to do to balance it right now.
I have a lot of thoughts, but it's hard to articulate. So you're in an interesting position where you have many shows in which you are talking much more about thing. What's happening? I just like the problem of staying informed is the modern world is like selection. It's not about finding a thing. So I think it's always been the case that a person with some well-selected RSS feeds can be very adequately up to date on anything they care to, because some RSS feeds are already a million times better than technologies were for trying to like keep in touch with what's going on. So I just don't perceive the problem of like, oh, I need to stay in touch. What people are worried about is a kind of confusion with volume of consumption as proportional to amount of staying in touch. And I just don't think that that's the case. I think that's like a perception problem. You're not more in touch if you've heard about a thing 7 times. You're just as in touch as if you heard about it once, like through one cleverly selected RSS feed. So I can't conceive that you will actually lose touch in any way. And it's really funny because you having a folder called Vibe Check, to me, it's like, oh, that feels like Mike is still too in touch. Like, that's kind of my initial response to that. It's like, oh, I would prefer a Mike who was more out of touch and didn't feel the need to have like a Vibe Check folder. But I can totally understand that as a transition away from Twitter. Like, oh, maybe what's a Twitter, or I was gonna say Twitter-like thing, but it's actually different. It's more like, what is a way to extract what you think is the value in Twitter without having that as a tool?
I'm kind of using it like microblogs, really, because I don't ever read what people are saying in response to these tweets. I don't see in this the responses people send. These are purely the tweet, like, they call them toots, which I just think is ridiculous. Toots to their audiences.
Oh, that's awful.
There's a lot about Mastodon that just doesn't vibe with me as well, like, which is part of why it was so easy for me not to move. I don't care how many videos there are. I find it confusing, like the overall structure of it. I find the URLs complicated. Like, there's a lot of it that I don't like. There's also something which is really funny to me that a lot of people left Twitter because they don't like this one guy who's controlling it. But Mastodon, inherently, like the way it is built as Mastodon, it was one person's decision about the way that the service works. It's just all very funny to me, but I'm just not interested.
Also, I know literally nothing about Mastodon, but just the very fact that they want to call them toots, it's like, oh my god, you guys are setting up roadblocks for yourself. You don't need to for mass adoption of this thing. Like, don't pick unappealing words just because you think they're funny.
Tweet was bad enough.
Yeah, Tweet had the advantage of being cute and conceptually aligned with it's a bird, and what do birds do? They tweet. Mastodon's toot. Okay.
I think the idea is it's meant to be like the sound they make from the trunks, right? But like,
that's not what people are going to think.
People think about it, and I actually don't think. I believe it was originally pitched as a joke, but then was adopted as the official nomenclature for the service.
Wow, that's really regrettable, Mastodon.
Honestly, great. I think a lot of the decisions about Mastodon are regrettable, personally. But I'm happy that like the tech community has found a new home for itself. Like, I am very pleased that there is something that people are excited about and are going ahead and using. Like, because it would have been really sad for me if like people didn't want to be on Twitter anymore, but had nowhere to go. And like, I'm happy that people have somewhere to go. I've just decided that I don't want to go to it right now. And like, there are things that are helping me. Like, I don't feel like I need it so much because I use Discord so much now. Private Discord, public Discord, like that is a much better place for me and for what I'm looking for and the type of communication and social thing I have. Also, what I didn't want to do from this is I don't want to make it that I've completely shut down any type of free feedback to me or the shows, right? That like people can't send in questions to me anymore. They can't send in like general follow-up. And so, because, a lot of that stuff can come through our members Discord, but I didn't want to make that the only way that people can send stuff in. So there is now, on the Real FM website, there is a feedback button, and people can get it from this show, or they can go to cortexfeedback.com and they can send in questions. So like, Ask Cortex questions can come in that way, for example. So that's on our website now. We built that. It goes into our own CMS. It's like a tool that we're building, so we can collect follow-up and feedback. We just put it live like a couple of weeks ago. It's an early version of what we want this to be, because as well, my co-founder Stephen has also left Twitter, and he's also not on Mastodon. So like,
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, and so we're very much like, all right, we need to work something out, because I was starting to realize that, like, submissions of questions and stuff has been a thing on this show and many shows, and I don't want it to be that the only way you can get in contact with us is to become a member. Like, there's just something wrong about that. So this is now like free open feedback form that anyone can put their info in, and so far it's been live for a couple of weeks on some shows. I'm very happy with this as a system. It works great.
So I presume the format is the same for all the shows. So it's relay.fm/showname/feedback. Is that like just a generic thing for all the shows? That's a really good idea.
For the shows that have opted in, it's an opt-in thing for each show.
Okay.
Does not everyone? Some people are just still very active on Mastodon, so they don't want this, and they want their stuff on Mastodon or Twitter or whatever. But this is something, because as well, what's great about this is not email, so it's going into a specific place, and it's character limited.
Oh, I see. Right.
So this is the type of way that I want my feedback for my shows. And honestly, so far, like, the feedback is high quality and good and helpful, and like, this is the kind of stuff that I want. Because as well, it's like feedback I would get by email, while too long, even if someone was mad at me, it was always better than a tweet.
Yeah. Well, before you mentioned that you built this system for Relay, which I think is great, I was going to say, like, this again, the concept of being out of touch, or like the concept of not being able to get feedback. It's like, emails existed for a really long time. Like, that's totally a thing that you can do. And there's a weird way in which email, which used to be the low effort way to get in touch, has now become the higher effort way to get in touch compared to things like Twitter. And I do think, even with like the feedback forms on Relay, I think there's a big advantage in putting up a very small but not zero hurdle for people to get in touch. And like, when you say Twitter has changed and like changed the way that you felt about it over time, it's totally a function of just absolutely everybody has gone there, and it's just such a low effort way to respond to people. And so, well, yeah, of course, like, it's a kind of selection effect. If you massively increase the number of people who are there and also never increase the difficulty of getting in touch with anyone, well, of course the average content is going to go down. I feel like this is the lesson that older me would try to impart on younger me, when he just never considered the selection effect of like, oh, hey kid, the internet seems like utopia because it's just a very small number of people who are here, but like, think through what's going to happen when everyone shows up, and like really internalize what everyone means. It's like, it's not going to seem so great then. Like, what happens with huge groups of people, and that's kind of like the Twitter effect. It's just as it's gotten larger and larger, the average quality has gone way down. So I'm hugely in favor of this kind of thing. Of like, you still want feedback from people who listen to your shows? Tell them, like, relay.fm/cortex/feedback. Like, that's a great place to send feedback.
Or even better, it's cortexfeedback.com. Goes to the same place.
Cortexfeedback.com.
Just a nice domain.
Yeah, that is a nice domain. And that's great. And it's just a little bit of hesitation where someone who just is having a bad day and like wants to be mean on Twitter can do that real easy when they just see you tweet anything and they're on Twitter and it just like takes 2 seconds. Whereas this is more intentional. And I would expect that increases the quality of positive and the negative feedback. Like the negative feedback, kind of like you were just saying about how it's been higher quality negative feedback through email than compared to Twitter. So I don't see any kind of staying in touch problem at all, Mike.
We'll say, I mean, you are maybe not the right person to judge judge that.
I am 100% the right person to judge this.
I think I can make it work, right? Like, I believe I can handle my part, which is like, I think I can stay in touch. I can consume the information that I need to form the opinions that I want to be able to effectively create good content. Like, I'm very confident in that. My only wonder is like, is if it changes people's feelings or reactions to me and or my shows. There, but I am taking what I think is the best path for me, and I am hoping that people will come along on that with that in mind. Of like, just assume that maybe my opinion is based on the same information, not on the fact that I'm not a master. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I'm just trying to express an idea here. I'm just sort of kind of mentally flipping through the people I think have interesting opinions or write interesting things or say interesting things. Like, who do you follow in the world? And trying to like plot this out on a graph of like interestingness versus connectedness. And I feel like it's something like a bell curve, slightly weighed towards the less connected side of things. So people who have absolutely no connection in a real way, not the like, oh, not on Twitter kind of way, in the, oh, I've lived in a cabin for 2 years and haven't read anything in the last 10 years and I just have no idea what's going on. Like, that tends to not be very interesting. And then as you increase connections, people can be interesting. But there's totally a diminishing returns and a rapidly diminishing returns for increased connectedness. And sort of like we were saying before, the most connected people, when I talk to them, feel the most like talking to ChatGPT. Like, oh, you're not a person anymore. You're just like a reflection of all the things that you're connected to. And there's no one here, because if you are just connected all the time, there's no space for you to develop anything. And so it's kind of why I frowned a little bit when you told me about the vibe check thing, because in my, like, I know this would never really happen, but in like my fantasy world, it's like, I want to hear what my curly thinks about a thing before the vibe check. That's the most interesting moment.
By and large, that is the case. I'm not checking that a lot. And see, one of the things that I think I'm a little, that is a sticking point for me, I think with quite a lot of things in tech, I can be a bit contrarian. And that's where I have a concern, where people are going to forget that maybe I've always been that way. That then if I don't reference the thing that everyone's talking about, that must mean that the only reason I think differently to other people is because I'm not like up on the news, right?
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. You will get that kind of feedback for sure.
Yep.
I know because I have publicly talked about being more disconnected than the average person. I totally get that feedback where people leave these comments of like, oh, Gray's so uninformed because he doesn't know anything. That's just a natural thing that's going to happen.
Okay, so spoiler. That's why I'm worried about this, because I see these things too about you.
Okay, so that's the reason you're worried is that you see people like, oh, Gray doesn't know anything. Comments.
Since Gray took his year away from the internet, he doesn't know what he's talking about anymore. Right? Like, I see these things.
Yeah, but like, I mean, this is a bigger conversation about negative feedback in general. But my take on those comments is that they're almost always wrong. Like, the person is just over assuming lack of knowledge on my part because of disagreements. Like, that's really what's occurring. So they're running some kind of mental filter of like, oh, if they only knew more, they would agree with the opinion that I have, but they don't agree with my opinion. So that must mean they're lacking in information. I mean, again, my thoughts on negative feedback are just, if you don't agree with it, it's like you can dismiss it relatively easily. The negative feedback that matters is the negative feedback that you agree with, where you're like, oh, that person's right. But yeah, you are in a bit of a different position because you are in a place where you have to be talking about more current things on a much more frequent basis. But the reality of the situation is you're still going to be connected to this. That's why you've set up the vibe check. That's why you've set the RSS feeds.
Again, my issue is not my feeling about how I am going to be.
But that's exactly, like, that's where I'm walking this through, is like, that's the reality. If anything, like, in my ideal world, I would reach through the computer and turn the dial down on your openness a little further. But I totally understand why you don't want to do that. I'm not even suggesting that you should. That's just what I would do if I had the power.
I expect I will. And like, that is my goal, is to not need that. And that's why, like, at the moment, there's like 10 people in this folder. And so like, it's a handful of toots a day at most. And my hope is that, because I'm keeping this in my mind, because the idea, I want to get rid of that because I don't particularly want it, but I'm seeing it and I need it. And at the moment, I don't.
Yeah.
Like, I want to get through a big Apple news cycle and see how I feel after that.
I think that's great. That's actually really good to have a specific moment to think about, like a thing we can reevaluate at the end of the year in the theme section. So yeah, that's I'm actually really glad to hear that. But just to finish the thought is, so if you're doing this and you know that you are adequately in touch, and then people are leaving comments, be like, I can't believe Mike said the thing on the show. He's an out of touch fool. It's like, oh, but you know that's not true. Like, you know, you read the things about whatever the topic is.
Yeah, but you see, I think that's when me and you differ. And like, part of why I needed to leave this part of social media is I frequently do not have that faith in myself. You ask me on any given day if I'm good at my job, I'll tell you I am. If you ask me on any given day, like, what my skills are, I believe I can tell you them. And like, I can tell you that I think I'm good at coming up with content, etc., etc. But if someone tells me you're bad at this, you're bad at this, you're bad at this, and then you ask me that question, I'm not going to give you the same answers.
Right.
But this is part of that. I have to be able to start from this place of like, I believe I'm good at what I do, straight up, right? I don't have to rely on other people's opinions to be able to form my own. The only way I can do this is I have to be able to start there. And I feel like now, in 2023, I'm able to start there. But I am still susceptible to the down piece, which is the other part of why I can do it, right? So like, I believe I can leave now because I'm good enough at what I do. I also want to leave now, so I don't have to be ground down.
I guess I'm just trying to walk through here is the acknowledgement that comments about you being out of touch are inevitable, and that's fine. In some ways, I look at that as a price for increased interestingness. That's why I was thinking about like this graph before. There's some sweet spot about like turning down the dial and turning up the dial for like where do you want to be if you do this kind of work. But everything in life is a trade-off, and this is one of those moments. So like, this is a trade-off for a net positive increase in a bunch of things. It's a net positive increase in making yourself less ChatGPT-like when you talk about conversations. That's like a side effect of decreasing connectedness. It's a net gain in decrease in random derailments, but you don't get net gains without some kind of negative. And I just feel like this negative is relatively minor because it is only a negative, I don't quite want to say in perception, but I guess it's a negative from your perception, that you just know that you have a harder time with those kinds of comments. So that's that's why I was just trying to say, like, oh, but it's not true. And so you can kind of dismiss those sorts of comments if you know, like, oh, no, but I did read up on that topic. Like, I know more than this person thought I did. They're just assuming I know nothing. That's sort of trying to express my thoughts on this. Like, I'm very pro you doing this move. I just feel like you can't do anything on the internet when you are at any size of audience without having some people be really mad about it. Of course, there's going to inevitably be negative feedback. No, some of it hurts because it's accurate and it's like, they got me in my secret heart. Like they knew, or like, yeah, that was real bad. But some of it is just like totally baseless. And you have to learn to mentally divide those two things as two fundamentally different kinds of things. The negative feedback that is baseless or that you don't agree with, and the negative feedback that you do agree with. And they're just like, they're almost like two unrelated categories, and you have to kind of train yourself to think about them in that way.
Yeah, and I think I have gotten better at this.
Oh, for sure.
You've known me for a long time, and you've seen a lot of change in me. It's like, I still, like, I believe I am able to separate those things, but I haven't gotten to the point where they still don't make me annoyed, though.
Yeah, and that may never go away, because that can just be a human reflex for, like, it's this kind of thing again. And the annoyance can come from the fact of knowing, well, this will just be inevitable forever. Like, now that you have spoken about leaving Twitter, it's like, oh, inevitably forever there's going to be the mics out of touch comments, and that's just a thing. That's just like a negative cost for all of the positive upside. But again, if it couldn't be more clear, number one, I am the best person to judge this, and I think it's a great decision. Number two, I think it's a great decision. Like, I'm glad to hear that you've done this. I hadn't really thought about the situation kind of giving you cover, but you're right. Like, it's perfect. Like, if you're going to do this, this is the lowest friction way to step away from Twitter. Like, I'm happy that you've taken advantage of the, shall we say, unique moment in Twitter's history, and like this can be some real upside for you. And I'm also just really glad to hear that you haven't played the migration game that everybody plays. So like, oh, now we're all going to go over to this thing. That game never ends, which is why it's interesting to hear from you even just a little bit, like, oh, Mastodon already intrinsically has the things that we can just set our watches and wait until the time when everybody decides that Mastodon is terrible, we're all going to go over to some other place. So I'm glad to hear that you're not having this in your life in any way. And yeah, RSS, it's great.
It's back again.
Who would have ever thought like 2023 is the year of RSS, but it totally is.
商人よ。大商人になって私たちを育ててくれた両親に恩返し、未来の大商人をつる。
どうだい？ほほう。なあ。
And the person beside me is acting irate. I'm going to call a flight attendant before I stick my size 13 foot up their tiny ass.
The joys of air travel. Listen to Not Lost on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Before we get into the barnacle, though, I want to talk just a little bit about the whale lice, because this is all part of the exoparasite load, which, according to Carbonine, adult gray whales carry more exoparasites than any other whale species, on average more than 180 kilograms or 396 pounds of the stuff.
So they got a lot living on them.
Yeah, and I didn't do a breakdown of like how that sort of parasite load would be like for the human body, but I think a lot of our repulsion to barnacles and these rather large whale lice is that we think about ourselves, we think about our pets, and if those were on us, obviously we would want them removed pronto.
Hold on, Rob. I just tried to do the math on the loading of the barnacles and whale lice and stuff by weight. So if we're saying that adult gray whales can grow up to about 40 tons, which is 80,000 pounds, and then you compare that to, you said they could have up to almost 400 pounds of loading of barnacles and stuff. Mm-hmm. That is about 0.5% of the body weight. So if you translate that to a human, I don't know, somebody weighs 150 pounds, what's half of 1% of that body weight on the outside of them? Oh, I don't know. Is having like 3/4 of a pound of parasites on the outside be that bad?
I don't know. How many barnacles would that be?
I don't know.
Let's say it's one barnacle. Would you put up with
that's way more than one barnacle. That's a number of barnacles.
Well, I'm being generous here. I mean, let's go ahead and pare it down to just one, maybe two barnacles. I feel like that would still feel like 1 or 2 barnacles too many for us. But then again, we don't live in the ocean. We don't have barnacles, so it's not appropriate for us to really make judgments judgment calls like this.
Okay. Well, apologies for the rough math. I may have screwed something up there, but I tried.
No, I think you captured the general feel of it. Because again, we have to think about just how big these creatures are. And as we'll probably get into, the barnacles are not covering them head to toe. It's not like a suit of barnacles. They tend to be clusters in certain places, like top of the head, right behind the head, and other places.
Yeah, they got patches, little colonies.
Yeah. They have to keep a low profile to keep them being pulled off by the water. Though again, they'll often scrape against things. And off the top of my head, I'm not sure if they're necessarily scratching to remove the barnacles from their body, or if they're dealing with like general skin discomfort, or it has to do with the lice, etc. But they end up scraping off the barnacles anyway. The one whale we saw scraping against the bottom of the boat, there would be this colossal scraping sound, and then like a cloud of pieces of barnacle and like I guess maybe some dried skin and probably some loose whale lice would come floating up through the water.
That is gross. But to remind again, you said earlier, I think you said that the lice on these whale are not actually lice in the sense that we usually mean, like the parasitic insects that can be found on land mammals.
Right. Yeah. We call them lice because whalers saw them on the bodies of the whales they were slaughtering, and they just made the I guess a natural comparison to be made to lice that occur on human bodies, and they're like, oh, those are whale lice, but they're not lice. They're actually a type of crustacean that's related more to the skeleton shrimp, an organism we've talked about on the show before.
So what are the so-called lice doing on these whales?
Okay, so if you pick up Carradine's book, and again I recommend it for whale fans out there, he has illustrations of all 4 species of whale lice that you'll find on the gray whale. 3 of them are only found on gray whales, and then there's another variety that is found on gray whales and bowhead whales. But yeah, they're these. They get kind of big. They can be anywhere between 3 and 30 millimeters long. So at the largest, a little over an inch. A lot of the photographs you see of the barnacles on the bodies of gray whales, you can also see the lice clustered around them. They have this kind of like these kind of ridges on their bodies, though they may not be moving during the footage. They may live in populations of up to 7,500 on a single whale, and they generally live and die on the same whale, though there's some degree of transference that takes place when the whales are in close confines with each other. But they have no free swimming stage in their development, no stage in their development in which they're swimming free and running across other whales. If they're going to jump ship, they've got to like jump ship
straight to another whale.
Yeah. But all this, like the branding of whale lice, it just made me sort of automatically assume, well, they're drinking whale blood. Clearly, that's what they're doing. But that's not what they're doing. Carradine notes that they don't drink blood. They eat whale skin that's come off, just like old, essentially like eating dry skin except in the water. They're possibly eating a little bit of bacteria and algae as well, and they'll also eat damaged tissue. So Carradine writes, quote, though usually considered parasites, they might be more accurately described as cleaning symbionts.
Us maybe providing a benefit to the whale.
Yeah. Now, it's still worth noting that if there's an excessively large population, that might be an indicator of poor health for an individual whale. But that's obviously if an organism is in poor health, a lot of things are going to be out of whack, including the amount of creatures living on its side.
Yes, and that's true for organisms living on and in all kinds of other larger organisms. It's true for us. Like our gut microbiome is useful to us. All of those bacteria in our guts are helpful. But if something goes wrong with our immune system, they can turn opportunistic.
Absolutely. Now, coming back to the barnacles, Carradine notes that, quote, the barnacles are thought to be host-specific to gray whales, though there are isolated examples on captive bottlenose dolphins and beluga whales and one wild killer whale. And their life cycle is synchronous with that of their hosts. And he notes elsewhere that there are 4 species of whale acorn barnacles in general, in 3 genera, but we're talking about one particular species of acorn barnacle that is found on the skin of the gray whale, and that is Cryptolepis rationetti. Sorry, barnacles, if I butchered your scientific name. But Joe, you were kind enough to include a lot of close-up images of acorn barnacles in our notes here. Would you describe these for the listeners?
Well, different barnacles have different outer appearances, and I guess this is because barnacles, much like coral, they are small marine invertebrates, but they are perhaps most visually notable for the external mineral structures that they build. And those structures can sometimes be confused with the flesh of the animals themselves. But barnacles are actually crustaceans, so they are closely related to animals like shrimp and crabs. And when you've seen barnacles in the past, probably the main thing you've noticed are these external plates, which are made of calcium carbonate. They're made of the same material as eggshells or oyster shells or coral skeletons and so forth. And in barnacles, these calcium carbonate plates can have different appearances. Some look kind of like flower buds made out of stone, or some look like cement pumpkins. Some look like tiny volcano calderas. If you zoom way out, some of the colonies look, as I mentioned earlier, kind of like groupings of lichen. You see this, and you see the kind of holes at the top. They also kind of resemble the photos that people freak out about online. And I'm never sure how much of this freak out is kind of performative, ironic thing, but about like tryptophobia images, the lotus pod thing. I don't share this reaction, but while reading about barnacles, I came to glean that some people are deeply, viscerally repulsed by the appearance of them. And I didn't even know if I was going to mention this, but I've seen a couple cases where there'd be like an article on the internet about barnacles or that featured pictures of barnacles, and you scroll down and you look at the comments, and some people are reacting not just with disgust, I mean, there is plenty of that, but with like moral outrage at the author for posting these pictures. Like, you did something bad by showing me barnacles. I don't quite get that, but I think it may overlap with the tryptophobia thing, which, as I said a minute ago, I still am not sure how much of that is kind of like the creepy clown thing, like a fear that people are playing up on purpose to be funny, or how much like their moral outrage is just like a genuine emotional overload reaction.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but I will say that, particularly with the acorn barnacles here, they look a lot to me like the Eye of Sauron, that kind of appearance. Yeah. So there's something a little unnerving about them. Also, I think it's one thing to see barnacles like this on sort of the hull of a ship, or barnacles of another variety, but when they're on a living organism, I think maybe there's some kind of category confusion going on.
Yes.
And particularly with these sort of round aperture appearing barnacles, I think our minds instantly go to horror anomalies. We think of like clogged pores, we think of pimples, we think of various openings that may occur in diseased flesh, and that's maybe where our mind goes. Like, that's the nearest analogy that we have as surface dwellers, and so we think about all that when we see barnacles on, say, a whale.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I certainly share that I react differently when I see them on an animal versus on just growing on the the piling that a pier is resting on or something.
Yeah, like, seeing the whales in the wild, you could touch the barnacles if you wanted to. I did not. I only touched the whale once. That's good enough. I only need to make physical contact with the gray whale once. good. But there is this kind of like feeling that you end up having. It's like, should I help? Should I scrape? Not that you would, but you want to sort of help the creature. Again, you think of it almost like a dog. Whereas if your dog came up and your dog had some sort of sea pods or something stuck in its fur, like you want to help it out. If your cat has something stuck in its fur, you're going to reach in there and pull it out and get bitten as a thank you. But the whales are not asking for this treatment.
Well, and as I'll get to in a minute, I think there's more ambiguity than we might realize about exactly what the pluses and minuses of this relationship are. But a little more about barnacles themselves. So the life cycle of a barnacle goes like this. It begins as a microscopic larva that looks kind of like a cross between a flea and a shrimp. And in this larval stage, after being released by the parent, the barnacle swims around freely in the water column. So it begins life as a free-swimming organism. It's just one of the trillions of zooplankton bobbing around out there in the ocean. And as a larva, the barnacle's primary